All right, let's go ahead and make our way back to our seats. Find our way to our seats this morning. We're going to get started here in our time in the Word. All right. Well, we are in a series called The Sent Life, and we're spending our time in Matthew. So if you have opportunity or you have a Bible with you and you want to turn to Matthew chapter 10, that's where we're going to be today, Matthew 10. I saw a post this week on Twitter, a pastor who kind of gives advice to preachers and pastors on preparation as well as execution of preaching. He said to the group, to the Twitter sphere or whatever, X sphere or whatever it is, he sent out the message and he said, "Hey, pastor, when you're preaching the gospel, don't sound so mad." And I thought, oh, well, sometimes I probably sound mad while I'm preaching the good news of Jesus, right? But chapter 10 of Matthew has a little bit of edge to the gospel, doesn't it? We've seen that so far in the weeks leading up, as we talked last week about, will we fear man or will we fear God? There's a little bit of an edge there, isn't there? And, well, today's going to be no different. So here we go. It is incredibly easy to associate with Jesus without ever actually aligning with him. It is incredibly easy in our day and time to associate with Jesus without actually aligning with him. You can say you believe in him. You can even like some of his teaching. You can agree with parts of what he says. And it can stay completely disconnected from your actual life, where it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost you anything in life, in obedience, or in relationships. It just kind of exists out there in the background. A version of following Jesus that stays mostly internal, mostly private, and mostly unnoticeable. But when you come to Matthew chapter 10, picking up in verse 32, Jesus doesn't leave that option on the table. He doesn't affirm that version of faith or adjust his expectations to match our comfort. In fact, Jesus removes the category entirely. He speaks in a way that forces a decision. According to Jesus, you can't casually follow him. There's no neutral ground. There's no middle space. You pick a side. And what we're going to see in this passage is that the moment you do, the moment you choose, if you choose to follow Jesus, if you choose to side with Jesus, to be on Team Jesus, everything is going to change. Not just what you believe, but how you live, what you value, what you're willing to lose, and ultimately what you gain. But you must pick a side. And so this morning we have four kind of points we're going to use as our sort of guideline. The first one is pick a side. Creative, right? The first two are going to be like that, super creative. Pick a side. Verse 32 and 33 of Matthew chapter 10. Therefore, everyone who will acknowledge me before others, I will also acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I will also deny him before my Father in heaven. And this morning, we're going to take Matthew chapter 10, beginning in verse 32, in chunks, and we'll read a little bit more, but we're going to start there. Everyone who will acknowledge me before others, I will acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. Anyone who will deny me before others, I will also deny him before my Father in heaven. See, Jesus doesn't leave this vague, does he? Doesn't leave us guessing what he means. He doesn't say, if you feel close to me in your inner psychological self, then I'll acknowledge you before the Father. He doesn't say, if you believe in me in your own self-constructed way, he says, acknowledge me before others, and I will acknowledge you before the Father. The Christian life isn't just about what you believe internally, it's also about where you stand publicly. To acknowledge him means to openly align your life with him. It's stepping into the light and saying, I'm with Jesus. I'm on team Jesus. I belong to him. My life is tied to him. It's to make it clear by what you say and how you live that you are with Jesus. Not just in the safe spaces where other people agree with you already, but in the places of your life where there's actually something at stake. And he ties that moment right there in front of other people, acknowledge me before others, to the eternal reality before God. And that means what happens out here in the open, in our lives, in our everyday lives, is not disconnected from what's happening before God. Your willingness to be identified with Jesus in your life says something real about your relationship to him. And now most of us hear that and immediately think, gosh, man, geez, preacher dude, like, I'm not denying Jesus or anything here. I'm not like cursing his name or blaspheming him. What? Lighten up, right? We're not out here rejecting him. We're not out here speaking against him. We're not walking away from him publicly, deconstructing, and now we don't believe in God at all. That's not what we're doing. But the truth is, that's not how it usually shows up, anyways. It shows up in places like when you're with a coworker, and a coworker begins to share a deep struggle that's going on in your life. And when your greater reality is Christ, then you know that you come before the Father with your needs and requests, and the Father hears your prayers and petitions. You know that Jesus is the answer to what's going on in our lives. And you're standing across from a coworker who is struggling, who's suffocating under a problem, and you feel that nudge to pray with them and bring them into the courts before the presence of God to lay the request there, and you say, that's going to be weird and awkward. I don't think I can do that. And so you don't. It's when a conversation drifts into what you believe, and instead of naming Jesus outright, standing with Jesus, you keep it vague. I try to be a good person. I just try to be a good person. Or you know what? I'm a deeply spiritual person. It's when you're in a setting where you know what obedience would look like, and you know what obedience will cost you. You know that it'll cost you approval. You know that it'll change the way that people in that setting look at you, how they perceive you, whether you ever get invited back to that setting. And so you quietly just go along with it, or you slip out the side door and say nothing. And that silence, man, it begins to feel normal. Not only does it begin to feel normal, sometimes it even begins to feel considerate and loving. They were having a great time sinning. I didn't want to be the killjoy in the room, man. I wanted them to keep on doing what they were doing. They seemed to be having a blast. But Jesus doesn't give us a category for silent allegiance. He doesn't say, as long as you believe in your heart, you're good. He says, acknowledge me before others, which means there is a kind of faith that never speaks up, never risks anything, never steps out into the light of obedience. And Jesus is saying that is not a genuine kind of faith. Because according to Jesus, that's not a small thing or a side issue. But when we're in those moments, that's a revealing moment. It's a clarifying moment. It's a moment where you can see more clearly than any other. You can't and you don't casually follow Jesus. You pick a side. And the moment you do, the moment you pick a side, you have to understand that it's going to cost you something. If you're taking notes, number 2, it will cost you. See, I said it was creative. Matthew chapter 10, verse 34. Don't assume that I came to bring peace on the earth. Don't assume that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemy will be the members of his household. I should have preached this on Mother's Day, shouldn't I have? That would have been great. Welcome, mothers. Let's dive in. So when you think about Jesus, we typically think about peace. We think about love. We think about mercy. We think about unity and reconciliation and healing, right? And here he says, don't assume I came to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. Well, what does he mean? What does he mean, I came to bring a sword? He's not talking about violence. He's not calling his followers to rise up and create conflict, start a fight. It's not what he's talking about. That would contradict everything else we see in his life and his teaching. No, the word sword in this context is functioning as a metaphor. Because what does a sword do? It separates, it divides, it cuts in half. The inevitable results, the inevitable division that comes from the use of a sword is what he's aiming at, what he's talking about. When you actually align yourself with him, it will create division. It will create division. Truth always draws lines. And when you pick a side, it exposes where others stand. See, because not everyone is going to be standing where you stand. And what we often call peace is really just untested agreement. Everything feels fine until Jesus is placed on the table, until Jesus is clearly put out there, and then you see where everyone really stands. The moment Jesus is clearly put out on the table, who he is, what he requires, what it means to follow him, that kind of peace gets disrupted, doesn't it? The untested agreement of many of our relationships. The agreement that I'll just go along to get along. I'll stay under the radar, secret agent man, right? Christian secret agent man. And I can just kind of float along and maintain hundreds of relationships and just keep them in a nice, untested place where we never have conflict or division. The moment Jesus is put on the table, now there's something to respond to. Now there's a choice. Now there's a response. And people respond differently. Some will lean in. Tell me more. I don't understand, but I want to understand. Some will pull back. Don't bring that stuff up with me. I don't want any of that religious garbage, Bible thumper, whatever, right? Some will receive him. When Jesus is put out before them, they were waiting for him to clearly be set on the table in front of them, to come with them, to come alongside them, to be present in the room through his people. And they were waiting, and they want to respond to him. They want to follow Jesus, and others will reject him. And Jesus says that reality will come all the way into the closest relationships we have. A man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a household divided within itself. And that would have landed with the original audience hearing this in the first century. That would have really landed because family in the first century was everything. Identity, security, belonging, status, it all ran through the family. And Jesus is saying, even there, following me will cost you. Following him may create division in the very place you most want peace. Not because you're trying to be difficult or trying to cause problems, but simply because your alliance, your allegiance to him is now clear. It's now out there, and that clarity forces a response. And some of you have felt this. You've tried to walk this out, and it's changed relationships in your life. It's created awkwardness. It's introduced a divide that wasn't there before, and everything in you wants to smooth it over, wants to dial it back, wants to make it easier again. But Jesus is preparing you for this so that you don't misinterpret the situation. He's saying, no, this is what happens when you follow me and acknowledge me before others. Division happens. And this is not a sign that you have failed. In many ways, it's a sign that your allegiance is becoming visible finally. And now, I want to make something clear. This is not a license to be harsh. This is not permission to be combative, or argumentative, or insensitive, and then blame it on Jesus. Like some people create conflict because of their tone or their posture or their complete lack of love, and then they call it persecution, right? Persecuted church right over here, right? That's not what Jesus is talking about. The division that he is describing comes not from being difficult, but from being clear and convictional. Actually standing somewhere in relation to Jesus. From consistently and visibly aligning your life with Christ. And friends, that will cost you. It may cost you the relational ease that you're used to. It may cost you approval, but here's what you have to see. Jesus is not trying to ruin your life. Jesus is removing the illusion that you can follow him without it changing anything. There's an old fable from Aesop about a war between the birds and the weasels. And in the middle of this war between the birds and the weasels, a bat gets caught in it. And he gets caught by one of the sides. The bird sees the bat first, and they're ready to kill the bat because to them it looks like just another animal that got caught up in the war. And the bat pleads for its life, and it says, hey, wait, I'm not like them. I'm one of you. Look, I have wings. Look, I have wings. I'm like you. And so the birds let it go. Later on, the weasels catch it, and now it has the opposite problem, right? To them, it looks like a bird. And again, the bat pleads, no, I'm not a bird. I'm one of you. Look, I have teeth. I'm just a mouse. And again, it escapes. And so it starts living this way. With the birds, it presents itself one way. With the weasels, it presents itself another way. Always adjusting, always reading the moment, and trying to stay in that comfortable, safe space. And for a while it works until both sides catch on to it. And they realize that the bat isn't loyal to either side. It's just saying whatever it needs to say in order to preserve itself. And in the end, when it's finally caught again, there's no arguing left. The weasels kill the bat. Because it's made it clear. The bat, in going back and forth and not picking a side, proved that it actually doesn't belong anywhere. And that's the danger of trying to stay neutral with Jesus, trying to blend in here and fit in there, trying to follow him without it ever costing you anything. It may feel acceptable in a moment. It may even feel like you're just trying to keep the peace, but over time, it will leave you unanchored, untethered, and ultimately unaligned. Because you don't casually follow Jesus, you must pick a side, and when you do, it will cost you. Number 3, he gets first place or nothing. So the question, if it's going to cost me, well, how far does this allegiance have to go? How deep does it have to go? Well, look at Matthew chapter 10, verse 37 and 38. The one who loves a father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. The one who loves a son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. See, this is where it stops being situational and it gets really personal. See, now Jesus isn't talking about the external pressures out there, the divisions that might be caused because you take a stand, because you pick a side with Jesus. No, Jesus is now talking about what actually happens inside of you. What happens in your heart. What you love most, what you hold on to, what you're not willing to lose. And he says it plain as day, if you love anything more than him, you're not worthy of him. And in Matthew, in these verses of 37 and 38, the word translated worthy comes from the Greek word axios, which means fitting, appropriate, or of corresponding weight. Like something that matches on a scale. And so when Jesus says someone is not worthy of him, he is not saying that they must earn his acceptance, but that their life is out of alignment with him. That their loves and their loyalties and their decisions do not correspond to his true value, his authority, because something else is being placed above him, taking his place, making their way of life, as they live out their life, it's making their way of life inconsistent with what it means to truly follow Jesus. They're not worthy. The scales don't correspond to the value and authority and the weightiness of Christ. So where does he go? What does he use to kind of get to the heart of the matter? Well, he goes to straight to the deepest, most legitimate loves in our life. Father, mother, son, and daughter. He's talking about the very relationships that define you, the people you would naturally say, well, family first, right? They're my kin, they're blood. And Jesus says, if they come before me, you're not with me. And that's not because those loves are wrong at all. It's because even those loves that are closest and dearest to us were never meant to be ultimate in our life. They're good, but they are not God. They have some weight, but they don't have the weightiness of the good and holy and perfect and glorious God, do they? And when a good thing becomes an ultimate thing, it begins to control you. It begins to drive your decisions more than Jesus does. It begins to determine what you will and will not do. So now, instead of following him wherever he may go, you're filtering your obedience, you're following now through something else. Will this affect my relationship with my children? Will this affect my relationship with my parents? Will this affect my relationship? Will this cost me in my relationship with my grandkids? And slowly, Jesus gets pushed down the list. Not rejected outright, just outranked. You see, it's like gravity. In every system has a center of gravity, something with enough weight, enough force that everything else begins to orbit around it. Planets don't randomly drift about through space, do they? Their direction, their movement, their stability, even their shape, all of it is determined by whatever has the strongest pull in that system. And your life works the same way. There is something at the center of your life. There's something that you are orbiting around, something with enough weight that your decisions orbit around it, your priorities orbit around it, your reactions, your relationship, your hope for the future, all of it, it starts to take shape based on what it is orbiting around, whatever has weightiness in the system that you're in. Whatever is pulling the hardest. Whatever is heaviest in your life determines your direction. Whatever, if approval is the heaviest in your life, well then your life will orbit around what people think. If comfort is heaviest in your life and your life orbits around it and is shaped by it, your life will orbit and be shaped by it by avoiding it at all costs. You don't want anything that costs you anything. You want comfort. If there is a relationship that is heaviest, your obedience will always bend to protect it, even if it means disobedience to Christ. And if Jesus is not at the center, it's not that nothing is at the center. There's always something at the center. And then you look up and you realize, well, Jesus is still a comforting thought in your life, but he is no longer the one shaping your life. He is no longer the one you're orbiting around. And Jesus says, I don't come second. I don't come in second. I don't share first place. He doesn't negotiate for priority in your life. He says, I'm first or I am not being followed. And And then he takes it even further. Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me. And now for us, the cross, as I talked about last time, has become a sort of symbol. It's a piece of jewelry. It's a beautiful art piece, right? Like this one up here. Right? It's something that we're used to seeing all around. But to them, to the ones that he was writing to those who witnessed Christ's crucifixion, it was one thing and one thing only. It was an instrument of execution. That's what it was. So when they say take up your cross, they don't think of the cutesy little pendant that you might wear around your neck, right? They think of the instrument of execution. It was public. It was humiliating. It was final. When someone took up a cross, it meant one thing. They were as good as dead. They weren't coming back to their old life. They weren't holding on to any of their rights or negotiating better terms in this life. It was over. You know, in the old prison systems in America, they used to, when they had an execution and they were marching the person who was going to be executed from their cell to the execution room, a bailiff would go ahead or a guard would go ahead and he would yell out, "Dead man walking, dead man walking." And Jesus looks at his followers and says, that's what it looks like to follow me. No partial surrender, no selective obedience. Not I'll follow you as long as ... but a life that has completely and already yielded and surrendered to Christ as Lord. A life that says, whatever this costs me, I'm with you, Jesus. But we want Jesus and control. We want Jesus and comfort. We want to follow him, but still have the final say. We want to have veto power. Yeah, I know that's your perspective, God. I know that's what you're calling me to. And I'll do it in every other situation, but I'm going to pull the veto card for this and say, just this once, no. You don't add Jesus to your life. He becomes your life, which means everything else finds its place under him, under his lordship. Your relationships, your identity, your decisions, your schedule, your money, your success, your hope for the future, all of it. And most of us struggle with divided allegiance, don't we? We struggle with areas where we said, Jesus, you can have this, but not that. I will obey you here, but I'm not going to obey you there. Areas where something or someone has more influence, more gravitational pull over our choices than Jesus does. And Jesus in love brings that into the light, not to shame you, but to free you, to call you out of a life where you're constantly trying to balance competing loyalties, and into a life where everything is rightly ordered under Jesus. So the final point today is you don't keep your life by keeping it. Verse 39, anyone who finds his life will lose it, and anyone who loses his life because of me will find it. Yeah, everything in you says protect your life, hold on to it, preserve, keep control, avoid any unnecessary loss. And it feels wise. It seems wise, doesn't it? It feels responsible. That's what it means to be responsible. And Jesus says, if you live that way, you will lose your life. Not eventually because you made too many bad decisions, but fundamentally because you were never actually living the life you were made to live. And then he flips it and he says, whoever loses his life because of me will find it. Not might find it, but will find it. And see, the call to surrender is not a call to utter destruction. It's not a call to utter destruction. It's a call to ultimate discovery. It's not Jesus saying, give me your life so I can take it from you. It's Jesus saying, give me your life because you were never meant to carry it like this. The life you're trying to protect, the version of the life built on control, on comfort, on self-preservation, that life can't hold the weight you're putting on it. It can't give you what you think it will. It will always leave you grasping for more, always trying to hold on to what is fleeting. And Jesus says that's not real life. Real life is found on the other side of surrender. On the other side of saying, Jesus, not my will, but your will be done. On the other side of letting go of control. That's where life actually begins. And this is where everything he said is coming together. Why pick a side? Because neutrality will cost you your soul. Why expect it to cost you anything? Well, my friends, because anything real and anything truly valuable always does. And so how much do you think it would cost you to lay hold of, to follow the ultimate reality, the ultimate of value, the ultimate of worth? It always costs something. Why does he demand first place? Because, friends, anything less than first place in your life and my life will distort our lives. We will move around a center, an object, whatever that thing that is heaviest in our life, we'll move around it. And in moving around it, we don't just orbit around it, but it shapes us. It reshapes us. It distorts us. And pretty soon, we do not look anything like what God intended us to look like, how he wants us to live the life of flourishing, the life that he wants to give. Why lose your life? Because losing your life is the only way to actually find it. And so what makes this good news? Well, Jesus is not asking you to go somewhere that he hasn't already gone. Nick talked about this in prayer. He was denied so that you could be acknowledged before the Father. He lost his life so that you could find your life. He didn't protect himself. He didn't preserve his own comfort. He didn't avoid costs, anything that would cost him, did he? No, he walked straight into it, straight to Calvary, straight to the cross. Why? To save you from a distorted life. And so now when he calls you to follow him, he's not leading you into loss. He proved that on the cross. What came after the cross? The resurrection. He's not leading you into death for death's sake, to utter destruction. He's leading you to new life. He's leading you into the kind of life that he paid dearly to secure for you. And so we're going to respond. For a while here, I've kind of joked that preaching up here is just a monologue, right? Just me shooting words at you, right? Some of you dodging them, some of you catching them, right? But I was reading this week, and reading some of the works of the reformers, the early reformers in the, 1600s. And it was interesting. They were talking about the gathering, and they were talking about how when the word of God is preached, God wants to speak to his people. So the Lord wants to speak to us today and speak through his word. And while I'm a fallible human delivery system here, God's word is eternal and always accomplishes what it sets out to do. And so his word has gone out. God has spoken to us today here at Village. That's pretty neat, isn't it? God has spoken to us. So that's one side of the conversation. He's spoken to us. And the reformers believe what happens next is how we speak back, how we respond to that. And so his word has come, and now we get a chance to respond. Do we respond in worship saying, you are worthy, you are right? We say a hearty amen to your word is true. Or do we shrink back and say, it's lunchtime? Let's respond to the Lord in this moment. And not just through song, but we respond in many different ways. They talked about all the different ways that the church responds to God speaking, his revelation. They respond through song. We respond in prayer. We respond in giving. Do you know that in a materialistic world where every day I wake up and I look at the money that I have and I decide anywhere that I want it to go and I can have it go to anything that I want it to for my own sake, that in that world, the act of generosity, the act of giving is a way of saying, this world will not have me. I choose a side. I choose to give money in a way that I give it and I don't get to control where it goes. The Lord use it for his kingdom and for his glory. And we can break the hold that it has on us. That's a way of responding to the Word of God. We also respond to him in communion, where we remember what he has done, and we proclaim once again the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so this is God has spoken to us through his Word, and we now get to respond to him in worship. And so if you will you join as we sing a song of worship in response?